Good morning. Part 2 of the William Weld series here. We'll be moving on to Gary Johnson after this, but finish up with William Weld. This part is going to focus on trade, his involvement in NAFTA, the Council on Foreign Relations, and then building a North American community and what he's been a part of that. Positions on the IRS as opposed to the typical libertarian position, and then we'll wrap up with groups versus individuals and how the libertarian position is, and how William Weld is completely on the opposite side of the libertarian position when it comes to groups versus individuals. So let's start with the trade stuff, and we will move along from there.
The notion that he's going to impose huge penalties on Mexico and China at will violates our obligations under treaties and international agreements like the World Trade Organization. You cannot be president of the United States and talk like that. You cannot even be a candidate for president of the United States and talk like that.
You can't be president of the United States and talk like that. You can't even be a candidate for the presidency and talk like that. Wow, it's almost like he's against free speech in this. Absolutely, you can talk like that. That's just campaigns. Now, whether or not Donald, if he gets in, is going to be successful with making these changes and renegotiating them, that's another question. But for someone, especially in a libertarian ticket, to suggest that you can't even talk about stuff like that, he seems quite emotional. In a lot of segments I've taken from him, he seems a lot more calmer. But on this specific one, he seems very, very hot under the collar, so to speak.
Free trade.
But in the purest sense, free trade is always going to benefit the United States compared to other countries because we have the highest rate of productivity and we're the most technologically advanced country in the world. So we're always going to have that edge. And free trade is going to produce high-wage jobs in the United States. It's an imperative to get the wage level up in this country, and that's one of the things that's going to do it. You may lose at the margin some low-wage job, but free trade over the long haul, even the intermediate haul, is going to increase the wage level in the United States. And the notion that Mr. Trump has of let's impose these huge unilateral tariffs, we tried that with the Smoot-Hawley tariff in the 1920s, and it croaked the world economy.
Okay, so William Weld seems like he really believes that free trade benefits the United States of America. And he cites the United States as being the most technologically advanced nation in the world, and then we have the highest productivity numbers in the world as well. I don't know if that's true anymore, but I'm not going to get into that. But what I will say is, for free trade to work, you've got to have level playing fields on both nations, or a group of nations, meaning that labor costs need to be equal amongst the two nations. Environmental policy and regulation should be equal. The cost of taxes that the corporations pay, and then other legal concerns as far as their legal system and how they can be penalized and sued. Like the United States, we have so much consumer protection that companies can be sued for. So if those other countries don't have those kind of laws or regulations or safeguards in place, it produces a very unequal playing field for the two countries, and one country will lose manufacturing or other services, goods, whatever, to the country that has the least cost. And I think it's pretty easy to see, since NAFTA went into effect and GATT and all these other trade agreements, that the United States has lost a lot. It's kind of like the United States is way up here and the rest of the world was here, and then through all these trade agreements, it's kind of done this. Okay, this next segment is William Weld at the Gillette company giving an introduction to President Bill Clinton at the time in October of 1993. And where he goes in talking about NAFTA and the benefits of NAFTA to companies like Gillette and Massachusetts as a whole and the country as a whole. So let's take a listen.
Thank you very much, Al. I just want to make one point very briefly, and that is that President Clinton deserves enormous credit for taking up the cudgels in support of the NAFTA treaty. Politically, it would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to walk away from a treaty essentially negotiated under a prior regime, and he is in there with both feet, fighting all the way for what I think is the most important economic and political issue, international political issue, on the plate in Washington, D.C. today. I think it's a no-brainer for the country. The Mexicans' average tariff rate is 10%. Ours is 4%. If they both go to zero, guess what, sports fans? We gain more than the other people do. It's particularly a no-brainer for Massachusetts, given the structure of industry in this state, opening up a market of 85 million people for your products, opening up a $6 billion telecommunications market, a $3.5 billion insurance market. The schedules that have been negotiated for what tariffs are going to go to zero at what time favor our industries like electronics, computer software. So Massachusetts stands to gain as much as any state from the ratification of NAFTA. The arguments on the other side, I think, don't amount to a great deal. They're more fear than they are facts, and certainly this state has nothing to fear from the economic future. The point, I think, is that we've all got to get out there and pitch in. We cannot let the president carry the burden of persuasion alone in this country.
Okay, so he likes to promote free trade. He thinks the world of it. Talks about 4% tariffs versus 10% tariffs, how that would be a no-brainer, sports fans, for the advantages of the Americans in this deal. Praises Bill Clinton. Establishes that this deal was originally negotiated by the prior regime, which was George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41. And this goes to the fact that this is all establishment stuff negotiated by Republicans, Democrats. It doesn't matter. They've all been on the same team. They're just two wings of the same bird. And another thing I wanted to point out, he talks about there being 85 million people in Mexico that their markets be open to. But you got to wonder, you got to look at also the countries that you're going into if you're going to have free trade with. Well, what kind of money do the people have? Is there a middle class? Is there a big market for them to sell? Are they going to buy your products? Especially in the early 90s, the Mexican population wasn't that pretty poor. They still are. So I don't see how that would have been a big help so much for majority of corporations that were producing in America selling to Mexico. Yeah, I might be wrong on some of this, but I think overall that there wasn't a lot. Now, on the other hand, for Mexico selling into the United States, where the average income was much, much higher, they could produce things much cheaper and sell for a higher price and make buku money. This next segment is of Alfred Zine, the chairman of the board of the Gillette Company, discussing the number of employees at the time in 1993 and the number of components that they produced there.
We employ here some 3,200 people from all walks of life. And we manufacture and assemble here some 3 million parts per hour.
Okay, so that was the chairman of the board, Alfred Zine, stating that the company employed 3,200 employees there in 1993. What I've dug up since then is that the company now only employs 1,385. So they lost over half of their workforce, or around 57% of the workforce out of Boston has disappeared since 1993. I do believe this is in large part to NAFTA. They were bought out by Procter & Gamble in 2005. But according to this article from Boston.com Business, the Boston plant was not or should not have been affected by layoffs of the combining of the two companies. So I want to be, as fair as I can. When you're in business, you do have layoffs and mergers and things. There's other effects besides just NAFTA. But I think when you look at all the investment that's going on in Mexico for Procter & Gamble and Gillette, and specifically at these plants. I mean, look at this one right here. It's 100,000 square meter plant on a 60-acre site. And it's for the building their razors for Gillette, and the supply will be to the Americas and parts of Europe and Asia. Those jobs would have been in Boston, not down in Mexico. And then here's another one from the Latin American Herald Tribune, talking about the building of new plants for the razor blade manufacturing, Gillette. So, and this is a current August 18th, 2016. So one's got to wonder, once this plant's done, how many jobs are going to be left in Boston? It really looks like they're accelerating this. And yeah, these trade deals are not good for the United States.
I don't think you have to go so far as to abolishing the IRS. I think if you give people the sense that taxes are only going to go down, they may not go down a lot, but they're not going to go up.
Okay, so Gary, to his credit, was talking about before this about abolishing the IRS, and then William Weld jumps in there and says, I don't think you have to abolish the IRS. Now, abolishing the IRS is a very libertarian position. Yeah, it just is. You don't want to have a graduated income. You don't have an income tax at all. With the libertarian point of view, it's considered to be theft, legalized theft, taxation. So, again, William Weld is proving himself to be someone who's not a libertarian, just by saying that. Let's move on.
My question is, it has been repeatedly stated by numerous libertarian candidates in the media that they respect but do not endorse the Black Lives Matter movement. Others have said that they do not support the movement for Black Lives entirely. Where do you stand on supporting, protecting, and upholding the human and civil rights of Black people and people of African descent in the United States and across the diaspora? Thank you.
If I could, again, this may not be Republican dogma, but what I did very early on in my administration was to establish an African Caribbean American Commission, meet with them once a month, myself, not a cabinet secretary. All your concerns, anything we can do specifically. Same for Asian Americans, same for Hispanic Americans. Met regularly with Muslim and Arab community. My wife read from the Quran in Arabic to them. So, you know, I received the Golden Door Award for, you know, friendliness to various diasporas who were resident in our state. So that comes very naturally to me. I'm a pluralist. I think the essence of democracy is that the individual shall not be thrust in a corner. If there are members of groups who, by virtue of their membership in that group, are being thrust in a corner, that's when my blood temperature really starts to rise. Governor.
Okay, and so here we've got the problem of groups versus individuals, and both of these guys fail the libertarian test on this. They both start talking about groups and pandering to groups and giving special considerations to different groups if you identify with a group. The libertarian position is everybody is individuals, everybody has the same kind of rights. Those rights are to be protected regardless of group affiliation, if there is such a thing. The group thing is pushed by leftists to divide and conquer people. And that they would give into that and talk about policies they've had and while they were governors, pandering to groups. It's a real big concern. I don't want people like that in government, and it's not healthy for a society to split everybody up into different groups. Okay, so 30 minutes isn't enough to talk about William Weld and how unlibertarian he is. I've got to cut this short, and we're going to have a part 3 for William Weld not being libertarian. The next one I'm going to be talking about his stance on guns, his affiliation with the Council on Foreign Relations and the North American community. Maybe a few other things, but those are going to be the main things I'm going to touch on in part 3 on William Weld. And then we'll move into Gary Johnson. So I'll see you in part 3.